Moments after the Ukrainian president's address, the Council of Europe becomes the first international organization to recognize Russia as a terrorist state.
The EU agrees to start joint gas purchases before next summer, as President Putin blames the energy crisis on the West.
As Russia's war in Ukraine nears 8 months, a familiar sight. European leaders gathering to hear from the country's President Volodymyr Zelensky making another plea. He's calling for Russia to be declared a terrorist state and for a special tribunal to be created.
Together we will isolate Russia. Together we will punish it for the terror and make it feel the cost of the war it started.
Just moments later, the Council of Europe adopted a resolution declaring Russia a terrorist regime.
Russia wants to use only the language of terror. This is a fact. This fact should be recognized at all levels, political, judicial, and on the battlefield in Ukraine, by supporting our defense capabilities. I am grateful to you that the Council of Europe can become the first international organization to define Russia as a terrorist state.
The Council of Europe is made up of 46 member states, created after World War II to uphold human rights and democracy on the continent. Russia used to be a member, but was expelled after it invaded Ukraine.
Territorial integrity of Ukraine.
Members of the UN General Assembly have voted overwhelmingly to condemn Russia's annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions. It's the strongest show of support yet for Ukraine from the UN body, calling on Russia to reverse its actions. 143 countries voted for the measure, with only 5 against amid 35 abstentions.
A UN member state, one with a permanent seat on the Security Council, has attempted to annex territory from its neighbor by force. This UN member state has not only put its neighbor in its crosshairs, but also put a bullseye in this institution's core principle. One country cannot take the territory of another by force.
Despite a major US diplomatic effort to bolster support for the motion, 35 countries, including India and China, abstained. Russia's ambassador to the UN said the West is completely deaf to the problems of the global South and calls to finally address them. All efforts are thrown at promoting the Ukrainian narrative, but not for the sake of the country's well-being, only in an attempt to harm Russia. Last month, Russia formally announced the annexation of 4 partially occupied provinces of eastern and southern Ukraine. Voters in Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia had, according to Moscow, overwhelmingly backed joining Russia, but Kyiv and its Western allies rejected the referendums as meaningless and illegal.
The Ukrainian offensive accelerates on the southern front. After ceding several villages in recent days, authorities imposed by Moscow in Kherson have asked Russia to organize the evacuation of civilians from this territory, which was illegally annexed only 2 weeks ago. Vladimir Saldo posted this video to Telegram.
First of all, for residents on the right bank, but at the same time we suggested that all residents of Kherson region, if there is such a desire, in order to protect themselves from the consequences of missile attacks, go to other regions.
Russian missiles have pounded more than 40 Ukrainian cities and towns over the past 24 hours. In the capital Kyiv, the dreaded Iranian-made kamikaze drones have once again made an appearance. It is yet unclear whether there have been fatalities. The massive shelling, in retaliation for a deadly explosion at a Crimea bridge, have also hit residential areas, such as here in Mykolaiv, where a 5-story building was destroyed. Emergency services managed to pull an 11-year-old boy from the rubble. He had been trapped for 6 hours.
There was no talk of the war in Ukraine in Kazakhstan on Thursday, as Russia's President Putin greeted his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan at a regional leaders' summit. That's despite speculation that Ankara might renew efforts to broker dialogue between Moscow and Kiev. Instead, President Putin focused on a potential gas initiative.
If Turkey and our possible buyers in other countries are interested, we could consider building another gas pipeline system and creating a gas hub in Turkey for sales to third countries. Especially, of course, the European ones, if they are interested in this, of course.
President Erdogan defended Turkey's continuing trade relations with Russia, highlighting the deal it negotiated to allow Ukraine to export its grain.
While Turkey and Russia's steps will disturb certain circles, they will make less developed countries happy.
Thursday's summit comes after Russia's global isolation was reinforced by a UN vote condemning Moscow's annexation of occupied regions in Ukraine. The Council of Europe also adopted a resolution declaring Russia a terrorist state, urging Putin to try to shore up support among historical allies and neighbours.
Energy ministers of the European Union have reached a general consensus to start joint gas purchases before summer 2023. At their meeting in Prague, EU Energy Commissioner Kadri Simpson said gas prices remain unstable and more measures to alleviate the crisis, including the need to further reduce gas consumption when needed.
The Russian pipeline flows have dropped under 10%, and attacks on EU's energy infrastructure increase the uncertainty further. This is why the Commission is working to present a package of proposals on the 18th of October, and it will not be the last such package, as we must continue to develop our tools and adjust our approach as the situation develops.
Earlier, at an energy forum in Moscow, Russian President Vladimir Putin claimed his country was a reliable energy supplier and blames the West for disruption to the energy market. It's in the EU's court to resolve the crisis, he said.
Big gas bills have more than tripled in a year. Their population, as in the Middle Ages, began to stock up on firewood for the winter. What does Russia have to do with it? And they are constantly trying to blame their own mistakes on someone, in this case on Russia. It's your own fault.
Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, EU nations have been making efforts to use less Russian energy, as Moscow is using the revenues to fund its war. Together with steep cuts in supplies from Russia, the 27-nation bloc is reeling from gas prices almost 90% higher than a year ago.
Over 2/3 of all wild animals have died in the last 50 years, according to the World Wildlife Fund. It's an astonishingly fast rate, one that has also led to the extinction of countless mammals, birds, fish and other creatures. Latin America, with its large forests, has been hit the hardest.
The decline is global, but there are some regions that are affected much more heavily. 94% decline in the Latin American continent. This is not totally surprising because the continent contains tropical regions today contain so much more biodiversity. So it's obvious that the decline is therefore stronger, higher in those regions compared to Europe, where we have recorded a 15% decline. But the reason is that Europe has lost its wildlife much before.
The destruction of wild habitats is a big factor. It's estimated that 17% of virgin forest has been lost in the last 50 years.
We got to abandon this delusional idea that we can continue to take nature for granted. We can continue to develop ourselves wastefully, destructively, without taking into account the consequences of environmental degradation. There are consequences. And if we don't change course and become carbon neutral on one hand for climate and nature positive in terms of biodiversity, we will pay even more consequences and the price will be even higher in the years to come.
Worryingly for animals, if the world warms by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, climate change will start to dominate as a reason for wild animal death and extinction.